Our story begins with us flying into a house at night. After traveling through it for a few seconds, we focus on a lady sleeping at a table near her laptop. She is Madison, our protagonist. Her pen starts getting moved by an invisible force, causing her to wake up. The website on her laptop describes how to file for bankruptcy. Once the chandelier starts moving, she says, "Not again." From this, we know it isn't the first time this activity has taken place. Madison quickly goes upstairs to check on the well-being of her children. Since they are okay, she is relieved. Then she returns to her laptop. Upon closing it, she sees a zombie-type creature several feet in front of her. It starts coming at her, and she backs away in fear. Madison has to tell herself this isn't real. Suddenly, the creature is no longer there, but its disappearance was short-lived. When she sees it again, she screams fearfully. The next scene has a camera recording a man who says he's occupying the Heller household. He is there because there was a sighting of an apparition in the house. He is Miguel, initiating a certain scan. His colleague, Marcy, records him doing it. The man slowly walks around the room while holding his device. He says he heard a few things that could be direct voice phenomena. Soon he focuses on checking near the mirror. Marcy tries talking to him, but he does not answer. His lack of a response scares her. We hear his device picking up a signal with greater intensity. After that, the duo starts leaving the house in a hurry. Seeing them go so fast, Madison knows they saw something. She wants to know what it was. She even stops Marcy to get her answer. However, all Marcy says is that she's sorry before she exits the house. They quickly ride away in their vehicle. At that moment, Madison's 2 children arrive from school. Her son, Jacob, asks who just left their house. His mom lies by saying no one was there. She changes the topic by saying someone by the name of Mrs. Wallace will be coming over in 1 hour. Haley is Madison's daughter. In her room, the monster we observed in the beginning appears behind her. Surprisingly, the girl talks to it like the creature isn't terrifying. She tells it that it is scaring her mom. Supposedly, 1 hour passes due to them getting a knock on the door from the aforementioned Mrs. Wallace. Since she is there for Jacob, the boy's mother sends Wallace to his room. Entering it, she asks him if he's given any thought to what they talked about in their last conversation. Jacob still feels bad about what happened, despite not remembering it too much. A certain incident took place nearly 6 months ago. The boy didn't mean to hurt someone. He simply could not stop himself. He needs to take responsibility, Wallace says. She can't help him if he doesn't help himself. The boy has to lower his head in shame to comfort him. She says people who do bad things aren't always bad. Then, Wallace comes to Madison to inform her that Jacob seems to be adjusting. Madison happily shares that he's doing well this summer. Wallace will give them one more visit prior to filing her report. Afterward, Madison can move on. In the next scene, Jacob occupies a science class with a teacher. The boy throws an egg at a loose sheet, resulting in the egg sliding down. A second egg gets thrown against the wall and breaks. The teacher, Nikolai, asks him how is it that the results are very different if both eggs flew with the same momentum. Jacob answers that the wall applies a stronger stopping force over a shorter time. The sheet's stopping force is weaker with a longer time. Nikolai adds that the stopping force of the sheet is so much weaker that the eggshell barely cracks once it hits it. Madison is there to observe this scientific education. We find out that Jacob will be attending 9th grade physics at a young age. He expresses to the teacher how it will be weird for him to be surrounded by kids who are older than him. Soon Madison stops her mere observation to enter the room with Haley. She gifts a coffee to Nikolai. It seems like the man is more than just Jacob's teacher. As the family is leaving, Madison kisses him. Upon arriving home, Jacob tells his mother he heard her scream last night. The lie she tells him is that it was a bad dream. More importantly, though, is that she doesn't want to talk about it. At night, Jacob goes downstairs to make a sandwich. A lightning strike scares him. He drops his plate by accident, shattering it. Something bizarre follows this. A drop of water from the faucet stops midair before forming into a sphere. Jacob sees the grotesque humanoid creature on the floor, which scares the boy to the same location. He fearfully repeats to himself that it will go away. His mantra seems to work. The monster vanishes. Then that spherical water drop falls. The deal with the water is a mystery that remains to be explained. Later, Jacob occupies the washroom, and his sister comes to him. She asks if he thinks it is their father. He's certain it wasn't. Haley was likely talking about the monster. In the morning, Madison tells her son if something is bothering him, he should tell her. Her son is desperate to get out of that house, saying he could sell his comics to help propel the family into that possibility. But his mom assures him she is handling the problem. Soon the kids leave for school, meaning Madison is left alone in the house. She uses this time to engage in gardening. While she does, a man comes to her, introducing himself as Austin Hamilton. He's a representative of Civic Land Holdings. She knows who he is, having received his letters. She also says money has been tight for them. Austin has arrived with the news to inform Madison that he's been authorized to make an offer on her property. He does not want the lady to tell her neighbors because what they want to offer her is much higher than the market price. The reason behind this is that in the next 10 years, they plan on expanding in this area. Prior to leaving, Austin gives her his business card. At school, a boy throws something at Haley, and her brother sees it. He yells out to the hooligan not to throw things at her. The boy Danny instantly uses profanity to fight Jacob. Danny also calls him a psycho. We don't see how the situation unfolds. The scene changes to Madison returning home with her kids. Jacob demands to be given the chance to explain what happened at school to his mom. She tells him he broke Danny's nose. They were almost done with Mrs. Wallace's class. But now Jacob had this fight. He walks away from her in anger. As they argue, Haley sits in her room, saying they are fighting again. She's telling this to the being who haunts their house without seeing him. She knows he's in her closet, so she opens it to see the ghostly being standing inside. Strangely, she can talk to him normally, yet when she sees him, it fills her with fear. In the evening, Madison sits outside with Nikolai. They talk about her son, and the man says he could teach him somewhere else. She hates seeing Jacob in such a state. She starts saying that he reminds her of someone. However, she cannot finish the sentence. Nikolai assures her it's okay for her to talk about him. Therefore, she begins talking about her husband, about how they would make plans for the future. After Nikolai got fired from his last job, he learned to keep his mind on the present for simplicity. Knowing it's awful, Madison says that following her husband's burial, she felt some relief. It allowed her to be on her own. Those words don't sound awful to Nikolai, who thinks her reaction was natural. Then we see Danny with his two friends riding their bicycles to Jacob's house. Once they arrive, Danny starts throwing eggs at the house. In the meantime, Madison is with Nikolai in the bedroom, engaged in romance. Danny walks to the house and tramples a few flowers that Madison must have gardened earlier, because throwing a few eggs does not match a broken nose. Apparently, even that's not enough, for the bad boy is about to throw a brick through a window. What stops him from doing that is the appearance of the menacing ghost. He stands behind the window, looking at Danny. This frightening occurrence sends the boy fleeing in fear, even causing him to forget about his bike. Nikolai hears his fearful screams from bed. He soon starts leaving the house. We see a set of keys being taken by an invisible force. In addition to that, the framed photos on the wall start falling. This paranormal activity quickly escalates to have many items in the house move as if by themselves. Haley's blanket levitates high above her. After that, hands come out from the ceiling. Jacob sees them and calls out to his mother. Upon her getting to him, the hands are gone. The ghost emerges from the wall in Haley's room, prompting her to scream. A motivated Madison brings her kids downstairs for safety. Unfortunately, there isn't a safe place from the ghost. He comes out from the wall to start taking the children, which makes their mother throw a few punches at him. It isn't a surprise that her punches deliver zero effect to a ghost. The only interaction her hands are allowed to have with him is by having him glitch. In a short time, Madison sends her kids outside before calling Nikolai with the intent of staying with him instead of this house. When Madison comes outside, she becomes unnerved to see her son lying on the ground. There is something very unnatural quickly growing on his face. The same phenomenon starts happening to Haley, causing her to fall. This experience is awful for the mother. Both of her children suddenly acquire a rapidly growing, inexplicable disease. She carries them back into the house. Thankfully, the kids regain their health there in a matter of seconds. What's especially strange is that their illness vanishes completely, leaving no after effects. On the next day, Madison talks to a doctor outside her house. She informs him her kids are now fine. He will need to do some tests on them to understand what condition they may have. Inside, the doctor finishes taking samples of their blood. He says the kids are healthy, making their mother say he's testing for the wrong thing. Speaking to her privately, the doctor tells her he's done every test on them and can't locate anything obvious. Maybe he might find something in the lab. He thinks whatever the kids have could be caused by stress. But Madison knows better than to believe that. Prior to leaving, the man repeats that if anything comes up from the lab results, he'll notify her. At a different time, Madison searches the internet for burns giving rise to allergic reactions outside. She finds a website that says a scientist was confined to a lab after his experiment. He was working on a proton accelerator. Once he tried to leave, his symptoms would manifest. Madison especially notices the line that states there was no other case like it. After shutting down the experiment, the scientist was fine. Doctors were baffled by his symptoms. Then a loud thud interrupts her reading. Since it keeps happening, Madison calls out to Jacob. She enters the garage and finds him using a hammer there. He was the one responsible for the loudness. Jacob starts talking about his father. He's upset, saying the man left because he argued with him. However, his mom firmly denies that being true. She told Jacob's dad to leave, that's why he did. She wants her son to understand that his father became a very angry man. She couldn't take it anymore. To her disappointment, the boy does not understand and leaves. Later, a few rapid knocks come at the door. They came from Austin. He starts telling Madison it will merely take a day or two to get the paperwork going. She opposes him by saying she won't be able to do this right now. But he says he's trying to help her because they can begin foreclosure proceedings at any time. Madison fires at him. She also says her kids are sick. Austin replies they could be better someplace else. The man gives her some more time to think about it. Following this, we see the washing machine being set to a different setting by an invisible force. Madison opens the door, thinking it's Austin who knocked again. Lucky for her, it's someone she likes more. It's Nikolai, who wanted to check on them to see if the family is okay. She doesn't know what to say to that. She starts by saying she hasn't been as open with him as she should be, concerned for Nikolai. She adds that he deserves to be with someone who can offer that to him. Of course, the man is confused about where this is coming from. There is a situation in her life she can't talk to him about. Madison does not want him to get hurt. He behaves in an understanding way, not even asking her to try explaining it to him. So he starts leaving, being somewhat upset. Afterward, Madison enters the laundry room and gets scared due to what's happening to the machine. Its door opens while the door into the room closes behind her. Her screams are heard by her children along with Nikolai by his car. They all rush to her. The front door shuts on Nikolai to disallow him his entrance. All the other doors inside the house start closing too. A grotesque creature starts coming out of the dryer. Fortunately, Madison manages to break free from the room. She was being kept inside by a paranormal force. But the creature continues to crawl toward the gathered family. Just like Madison, Nikolai also breaks into the house. He rushes to the room where the fright is taking place. He observes the ugly creature for 1 second before it disappears. The science teacher wears a look of bewilderment. All of a sudden, he learns about the phenomenon Madison didn't want to tell him about. Perhaps he even understands why she didn't want to. The next scene has the curious man advising Madison that they have to call people about this. It changes almost everything they know, he says. The lady tells him she had many people in her house like mediums and priests. None of them believed her. However, Nikolai wants to help. She tells him an immunologist came to the house. He thought her kids' problems were psychosomatic. She also tells Nikolai of the irregular appearances of the creatures. On some days, nothing happened, whereas on others, a creature could appear twice a day. Some creatures are more grotesque than others. Hearing this, Nikolai becomes interested that there is more than one creature. Madison describes the different abnormalities that could take place when the creatures appear. She also heard her daughter talking to them. Nikolai expresses fascination toward her experiencing a phenomenon that has never been documented. He promises her they will figure this out. Elsewhere, Nikolai meets a former colleague of his. He gives a few containers to Nikolai. Then we see Mrs. Wallace at Madison's house. She tells Madison she has Jacob's best interests in mind. The boy's mother tells the lady her son was protecting Haley with his fight. Plus, he knows what he did was wrong. Talking to him, Wallace asks the boy if he knows how serious this is. Jacob simply explains to her what Danny did. Leaving the house, Wallace tells Madison that Jacob needs to show some restraint, but the cheated lady demands to know why Danny gets to walk, while her son does not. Because Danny hasn't beaten Nick unconscious in the last 6 months, Wallace reminds her. Danny's family wants to push for legal action and Wallace actually agrees with such a desire. In the next scene, Nikolai is at the house with those containers he acquired. He tells Madison that with this equipment, they will be able to detect any spikes in energy that the monsters create. He sets up a camera, saying it produces 10,000 frames per second. It means they will be able to see everything. Nikolai measured the normal electromagnetic reading of the house, and they will find out if that number changes. Later, all 4 of them are immersed in the game of Monopoly. Right after Jacob rolls the dice, they levitate into the air. They all watch in amusement how those cubes go up. The lights flicker too before the ghost materializes. The group goes into the room where he did. Getting scared by his presence, they run away. Since he chases them, Madison manages to break a chair over him. It doesn't go through him like her punches did previously. She just looks at the ghost for a few seconds until he vanishes. Then they run upstairs. The ghost reappears to continue chasing them. Luckily, they hide in a room to hold him off. He vanishes for the second time in addition to the last. In the morning, we see how ruined the house is from last night's activity. Nikolai collects something that looks like a ghost finger. He puts it into a plastic bag with a few others. The kids look troubled. As she is cleaning the house, Madison starts to cry. After that, she's on her computer, looking at the recorded footage from the camera. She observes how a light appears in her room. Meanwhile, Nikolai analyzes the fingers he collected. Madison zooms in on a section to see the ghost materialize from the light. There is something on his shirt that prompts the lady to zoom in further. It shows her a number with a logo. What's interesting is that the logo belongs to the same organization Austin works for. This discovery does not make sense to Madison. Soon she looks at the site she looked at earlier. She finds that there was a controversial new project being worked on called Echo. So she types it into a search engine that leads her to a website. It contains the information that the project was shut down due to human testing taking place in the lab. News of it leaked to the public. There is a photo on the site of the 4 scientists behind Echo. One of them is none other than Nikolai. Needless to say, Madison is taken aback by this revelation. Once she comes to him, she doesn't hesitate to ask what Echo is. The man is surprised at how she heard about it. She gets upset, yelling and asking why he didn't tell her he worked on that controversial project. It's because the work he did there was awful. He was scared that if she found out about what he did, she would hate him. Madison shows him a photo of the logo from the recorded footage she printed. She knows he was experimenting on people, but he says Echo should not be possible for another 40 years. Teleportation is what was being worked on, which is currently impossible. Nikolai wants her to know he tried to stop his crew from engaging in those experiments, despite them being done on the worst type of people, criminals. The problem is that he found out about it too late. Now he wants to help. The man thinks he knows what's going on and wants to show her. He types certain numbers he found into the search engine. They are coordinates on the map that show the location of the lab. Madison realizes the lab personnel are forcing them out of the house with all those creatures who keep appearing. Her wanting to shut them down causes Nikolai to tell her she cannot, because what they are experiencing is not happening in the present. The prisoner who keeps coming to their house is from the future. Therefore, Madison wants to take all their lives. The next scene has them creating weapons and setting up a trap outside the house. When all 4 of them are together in one room, the objects nearby levitate again. They observe the prisoner materializing, prompting them to run to another area. Austin happens to arrive at that very inappropriate hour. He yells behind the front door that he brought the contract with him. Suddenly, the door opens, and the poor man gets taken by the prisoner. After bringing pain to him, Austin is allowed to escape by crawling out of the house with severe injuries. His fingers look glued to each other. It doesn't take long for him to lose consciousness. Inside the house, Nikolai locates the man from the future and provokes him to follow Nikolai. He thinks he will give him a surprise attack, but it's Nikolai who receives the surprise. The prisoner teleports near him to grab Nikolai by his neck before holding him against the wall. Yet the man in trouble slams him on the head with a hammer a few times while Madison attacks him from behind with a custom spear. It seems like there is more than teleportation to this prisoner, because a regular person would have already gone down. However, he continues to function like he received a mere sting from a bee. The prisoner removes the spear from Madison, which forces the duo from the present to run away. Then he comes outside, where he starts to suffer sort of how Madison's children did. He also falls into the trap that was set up. Nikolai and Madison use this moment to strike the man with their weapons repeatedly. As they do, he stabs Nikolai's leg with a knife he collected. Madison drags him back into the house. He urges her to eliminate the prisoner instead of tending to him. Afterward, the police enter the house out of nowhere, pointing their guns. Nikolai informs them of the situation. Soon the prisoner appears behind one of the officers to take his life. Nikolai tries to deal with him, but the prisoner throws him at the other policeman. This results in both of them falling downstairs into the basement. The man from the future follows them, taking the life of the second officer. He sees Madison there with her kids. She angrily tells him to stay away. Interestingly, the prisoner simply looks around the room in confusion, trying to attack him. Madison gets handled by him very easily. Jacob strikes him with a hatchet, only to have the prisoner face in return. In doing so, a scar forms on the prisoner in the same place. This means he is Jacob from the future. It seems like he never does learn to restrain his impulsive actions, for he ends up getting incarcerated years later. Seeing the scar form on his face, Madison realizes who he is. Then Nikolai gets up to shoot the future Jacob down, making his mom react with unease. The wounded man comes to Madison to tend to the wound her future son inflicted on her. Following this, we see more of the police arrive at the house to enter it. Jacob tells his mom not to leave. They need her. Yet Madison crawls to her future son, and a strong light surrounds them. In a matter of seconds, they teleport away. When they appear in a white room in the future, Madison looks at Jacob, who opens his eyes in a passing away state. The scene changes to show two guards walking beside the future Jacob. One of them calls him by his name, causing the other one to say they should not call the prisoners by their names because their brains are scrambled. But the first guard counters that Jacob has something going on in his mind. It's not much, though. We learn Jacob was kept there for about 40 years. He was caught trying to detonate the lab to avenge the loss of his mother's life. In all the time he was kept there, his mind was brought to ruin. That is why he could no longer recognize his family and brought harm to them. If he recognized anything, it was a small amount. This happening with the guards was an event that took place before he was sent back in time. Returning to Madison lying with him, she hears an alarm. We see the faces of several people looking at them. She touches her future son's face compassionately. Back at present, Jacob seems the most affected by all this chaos. As he is leaving the basement with everyone else, the strong light returns, making him turn around. It is his mom who was sent back. A happy Jacob comes to hug her. Neither of them even says a word to each other. The doctors from the future must have brought Madison back to good health prior to sending her to her proper time. Now Jacob won't need to take revenge for her loss to get himself in prison. That 40 years of imprisonment will be replaced by a meaningful life.